Ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country. Can anyone tell me who said these words? Excellent. Do you know when and where? Good guess, good guess. It was 1961 when President Kennedy challenged the country with those words during what was arguably one of the shortest and best inaugural addresses. Now, in honor of his brevity and the topic of service, I would like to share some of my thoughts with you. And forgive me because I don't give speeches very often. I needed a really simple way to help me remember what I was going to say. So, I truly believe that we all serve, each of us, in some form or capacity, whether medical, humanitarian, military, education. I also firmly believe that service is one of the greatest challenges we face on this earth. Now, service goes hand in hand with suffering. Period. Dot. You should accept it. If you serve in whatever field you're in, you will suffer a pain of some sort. So I'm going to talk about Mark Hurst and the suffering that he went through in his Army Ranger Battalion in recovering the remains of my husband. And I will talk about perseverance and the struggles of my family with addiction and building character, then inspiring others as we go forward from our pain and our loss and help children lead a different way in life. And I will conclude with hope, because there is every reason to take great hope. Mark Hurst is a man that chose military service. And he expected suffering, given the fact that he is an Army Ranger in TAC P, whose Ranger creed is, "I will never leave a fallen comrade." Now, in the spring of 2004, Mark was deployed to Afghanistan, and a rocket-propelled grenade struck the vehicle that he was in and caused such severe shrapnel wounds to the left side of his body that he lost his left eye. And instead of just suffering through that, he chose to persevere in his service and continued on in the military. Not only that, he went back to his career. He was jumping out of perfectly good airplanes. He was leading his troops and inspiring others. A year before he was wounded, he and his battalion were called to carry out their creed, to never leave a fallen comrade. They received this call to fight their way in to a heavily fortified area, Saddam Hussein's hometown, recover what they could of our downed U.S. fighter jet and any of the crew, and then fight their way back out. They were called to carry out this mission within 12 hours of an already agonizing battle in which they lost some of their best men. Now, I am not superstitious, but I am holding something in my hands that is a treasure of the earthly kind. It is suffered, like Mark, but it is what they brought back on that mission from the crash site. And it is a coin. In our community, we know it as a round metal object. And this was returned to me, but I'd seen it before. A week earlier, my husband and I went to the store on base together to gather up some items to send back home to those that were supporting us. This was one of them. And on one side, it says, "We will never forget, September 11, 2001. And on the other side, it has an American flag. It says United Together. And now it is very evident that it has suffered. So how do we persevere? Where do we get perseverance? How do we pull ourselves up by the bootstraps and press on? I learned about service from my mother. She is a proud and patriotic spouse of a Vietnam veteran, a Marine helicopter pilot. She was a loyal and dedicated friend that everyone counted on. And she was an amazing mother. She volunteered with an organization called the March of Dimes. So she demonstrated to us at a very early age what it meant to serve something greater than yourself. And she chose to educate and advocate for those who have birth defects and disabilities and help out the families of those that are struggling with kiddos that have special needs. So I saw that from a very young age. And when times got tough, her favorite saying was, "You've reached the mountains, and you've reached the foothills, and the mountains are in view." So that eternal optimist, keep looking up, chin up. Mom served and suffered. And she fought a very private battle every day against addiction. And when you choose, sometimes the outcome is not what you'd like. And she died when I was 17 years old. So I take the lessons, the good, the bad, and the ugly, and I choose to build a character and inspire that in the children that I now work with. There are teenage girls out in the world that have suffered tremendously, whether by abuse or neglect. And I have had the privilege to serve with them overseas in Kenya and also in my home state now in Alaska. And regardless of their walk of life, where they come from, they are trying to choose a better way, a different way. And sometimes the only option they have is to claw themselves up from the pits in which they lived. But there's a 13-year-old girl that witnessed what was described as terroristic domestic violence. And the character that that 13-year-old displays is above reproach. It reminds me a lot of a 6-year-old Kenyan who did not have the time to play soccer with me, which is telling of a child. A soccer ball that was made of crunched up plastic bags because she was too busy desperately and valiantly looking for anything edible as she was carrying her baby brother on her hip in a sewage-filled stream of horror where she lived. But the character that she displayed, I take with me every day. There is a great deal of hope that I have in my heart. And it is built off of these basic principles. I expect that I will serve, and I enjoy it, and I rejoice in it. But I realize that it comes with suffering. But it's building my perseverance, my character, and my hope. But no greater love than this, than a man who lays down his life for his friends. And my husband was called to carry out that duty over 9 years ago. When I returned from being deployed, I had a new mission, and it was to go home. Physically, like return to my home, and I was dreading it. So I asked my best girlfriend, Michelle, to follow me, but she gave me about 30 minutes to process the place on my own. And I walked through the threshold, and I looked around. And I stood in our kitchen, a favorite place of ours, and I realized that my husband had been very busy while I was gone, and he was waiting to deploy for his tour of duty. He made very good use of his 30th birthday gift, which is the sliding compound miter saw. Awesome engineer. And he fashioned me this beautiful wooden trash can that I was seeing for the first time. And I fell to my knees, wailing over this trash can. You see, I was pretty exhausted and kind of just a shell of myself. A lot of miles traveled, a lot of memorial services, of a lot of gratitude, people showing their respects, 2 funerals. And I was really frustrated and angry because I didn't know what happened exactly. I couldn't answer all the questions. Hey, what happened that night you guys were overseas? So I just fell and I yelled, "Why didn't you get out of that jet?" Thankfully, right about that same time, Michelle rolled in on me and peeled me off the floor, and she wiped away what she could of my suffering. And then she had the audacity to tell me what I needed to hear. She said, "Nick, if he could go back and do it knowing the outcome, he'd still go." Michelle reminded me that my husband chose to persevere in service. She reminded me that suffering, oftentimes painful, is worth the fight. JFK in 1961 challenged the country, as I mentioned. 100 years before that, President Lincoln was burying his 11-year-old son. And 19 months later, he famously addressed Gettysburg and challenged the citizens of this country at the dedication of the Soldiers' National Cemetery at Gettysburg. He said we should take an increased devotion to duty, to honor those that had paid with the last full measure of devotion. At the same time, he declared Thanksgiving a mandated federal holiday. This epic hero of the United States found it necessary to persevere and give thanks, no matter how searing his pain. I'm grateful for those who have gone before me, leading the way in service, for an example that we can follow. The last thing I'd like to leave you with, in hope, is the image of a tapestry. This is a beautiful piece of art, intricate in detail and color. And you can just imagine the love that went into handcrafting it on one side. The other side, It's a knotty mess. It is hideous and ugly when examined from that one side. And all too often, I'm on that side looking at all my little knots. I need to remember to look up, and I honestly believe there is a master artist at work on the other side, weaving something beautiful. Thank you.